Mary Matheson's eyes fixated on the Ferris wheel lights as they lit the night sky. Every year she looked forward to the Mississippi State Fair. This year was really meaningful to her. She needed the lift. Like everyone, her life took some unwanted twists and turns, highs and lows, rising and falling. Now, nearing her mid-40s, undesirable turbulence rocked her flight through life. Mary Matt, she thought the state fair, would bring her joy, just like it did every year of her childhood. Mary's husband, Rick Masterson, accompanied her along with her best friend, Sally Kansas, and Sally's boyfriend of 6 months, Mason Baker. Each had different hopes for what the night would bring. They all agreed that the night's highlight would be sitting for a session with the fair's guest fortune teller, Madame Drabari. Mary had won a private session with the fair's celebrity mystic as a reward for the most consecutive years of attendance. The award required that she and all who accompanied her sign a non-disclosure agreement to keep all appointment details confidential. Madame Drabari only did readings for a select few personally chosen by her. Madame Drabari's assistant, a man called Doug, told them she would not be at the fair. But if they were interested, he could arrange a private reading at an abandoned plantation home on Halloween night in Natchez. Madame jumped at his offer. A private reading on Halloween night? That would be wonderful. Can we wear costumes? Mary didn't hesitate, providing her cell phone number and email address as the others looked on. Mary and Rick dated in high school and chose the same university to attend after graduation. Mary got her degree in journalism, leaning on her love of all things creative, while Rick opted for business. Rick completed the prerequisite BS degree before enrolling in the master's program to attain his MBA. Mary's childhood friend, Sally Kansas, left town after high school graduation and headed out west for the bright lights and stardom that Hollywood promised. She'd gotten a few parts, starred in a few commercials, and made a few bucks. Then things took a wrong turn. She found herself back in Mississippi after the Hollywood meat grinder chewed her up and spit her out, wondering what her future held in store. Sally's escort, Mason Baker, also went to high school with Mary, Rick, and Sally. He and his family lived next door to Mary, but he wasn't part of Mary, Sally, and Rick's clique. He wasn't a member of anyone's group. He was a loner, considered a little weird, spending his time fishing in the Mississippi River, hunting in the nearby woods by himself, somewhere between a social outcast and a recluse. Like Sally, he left town after graduation. But unlike Sally, Hollywood held nothing for him. New York suited him better. That's where big money flowed. He'd only been back in town for 8 months, and it didn't take him long to look up the girl he had a crush on from his teen years, Sally Kansas. Now they were dating, and if you were to believe Sally, they had become a hot item headed toward marriage.
Sally, can you believe we're getting a private session with Madame Drabari?
Of course she picked us out. We are the best looking people here. We stand out. Check it out. Everybody's looking at us.
If you say so, Sally. I don't know why they chose us, but I guess we'll find out Halloween night.
That's the point, Mason. None of us knows what to expect. That's the fun of it. As a businessman, I look at every possible twist and turn of the market. How exciting to hear what the spirits can tell us about the future trends in business. Any edge they can give me, I welcome.
Only you would see a business opportunity from Madame Drabari's session, Rick. Not me. I want to know what's on the other side. I thought everyone wanted to know about the afterlife.
I don't have the luxury to worry about what might come in the afterlife. I've got my hands full battling formidable competition every day to keep a roof over our heads.
All eyes shifted to Rick. His comment took them aback. It was a ridiculous statement to claim that he had to work to take care of the basics. He and Mary had enough money to fund a small country. Mary fought to hide her embarrassment. Though they'd been married for her entire life, she hadn't got used to his stupid comments. It seemed that sometimes the smartest people could say the dumbest things. Halloween night was cold in Natchez. A crumbling house stood against the chilling wind, alone at the end of an abandoned road. They wore the costumes Madame Drbari's assistant, Doug, had told them to wear. Mary, dressed as a zombie, happy to look like the undead from her favorite television series, The Walking Dead. Rick cut a striking figure as a vampire with slick-back hair and a cape. Sally, dressed as a cat, looking more like the Catwoman figure from the Batman movies than a real cat. Mason's costume fit his stoic nature, and he made a superb Grim Reaper, scythe included. Rick and Mary Masterson, the longtime married couple, knocked on the door.
My name is Dutaniser. You know me as Doug. Each of you has chosen to cross the threshold into this world to speak with the spirits. The spirits are ready to reveal hidden and buried secrets. If you're having second thoughts and want to change your mind, now is the time to leave.
Doug circled his hand clockwise in a sweeping gesture, ushering the group toward the 5-foot-long table positioned in the center of a gigantic room. He stepped behind them, and they heard the door close, followed by a snapping click. There was something final about that clicking sound. Once they'd stepped across that threshold, they'd seemed to enter a world from which there was no return. They settled into the high-backed captain's chairs, their hands comfortably relaxed on the armrest. All eyes turned to a woman descending the staircase, dressed in a floor-length sari, her head wrapped in a chartreuse scarf. She inched down the steps, one at a time, toes pointed, gliding with a dancer's grace. He shifted his gaze to Madame Drbari, gesturing for her to start.
I feel tension in the room. You must relax for the spirits to speak. The aromatherapy diffusers will activate with a chamomile and lavender mixture to calm your nerves. Breathe the mist, sit back in your chairs, and then we will begin. The spirits have much to share with each of you. But before we begin, you must ask yourself, did you see the signs?
The misters activated, and the four bent forward and breathed in the aroma with deep and lingering breaths. The relaxation worked immediately. It should have, because it was laced with knockout gas. Sally's head hit the table first, followed closely by Rick and Mary. Mason was the last to fall, though less than 5 seconds had passed since Sally's head collapsed. When they awoke, their eyes widened in shock. They found their arms and legs solidly duct-taped to their chairs. None of the four knew how much time passed before they awoke. Not that it mattered anyway. Rick was the first to speak.
What the hell is this? You can't keep us here. Cut us loose right now, or I swear you'll regret the day you were born when I get free.
Madame Drbari sat in silence, motionless, as if she'd turned from a living, breathing being into a marble statue. Doug stood next to her, his hands by his side. Rick strained against his bindings, as did Sally and Mary. Mason didn't move, as if floating in a dreamland, free of earthly concerns. And, as Doug said, it did no good to struggle anyway. Mary gave up first. She had to because the room seemed to spin. Her eyes rolled back in her head and she fainted. When she regained consciousness, her eyes locked on the crystal ball. Madame Drbari's face appeared in the glass, and she began to speak.
Mary Masterson, awaken and hear what the spirits have to say. You've come here to get answers to burning questions nagging your weary brain. Are you prepared for the answers you seek?
Let us leave. You can't keep us here. We are canceling this reading and going home.
The spirits have much to tell you. You are all bound to the chairs for your safety. There is another reason. The spirits will not allow you to leave until they have revealed all truths. If they let you leave at all.
Madame Drbari's electrified eyes shifted to Doug, communicating a silent message he seemed to understand. Doug turned toward the four bound guests, extended his hands, placing his left palm on the back of his right hand, then waved his arms in an arching motion, his palms facing Rick, Sally, and Mason. Doug's gesture silenced all three voices, leaving only Mary with the ability to speak. Concern, anxiety, and fear registered on each face as they tried to scream, their mouths moving without sound. Mary let out a window pane rattling scream, followed by flowing tears, closing her eyes and shaking her head. Doug allowed enough time to pass for her to regain her composure before speaking.
You will each be able to speak when it is your turn. The spirits require you to sit speechless, listening until it is your time to speak.
You all grew up in Natchez. Mary, you had a sister and a brother. Your parents worked in the banking business, giving you an upper-middle-class lifestyle. You did well in school, making good grades, participating in extracurricular activities, and being named your high school's head cheerleader.
Which spirits are you talking about? What do they know about me?
Every person has many light and dark spirits residing in them. They will all share their secrets before the night is over.
Mary didn't speak. She shifted her eyes to Rick, then to Sally, a helpless look on her face. Doug continued.
Mary, you had a privileged childhood, loving parents who were considered wealthy. Your parents loved each other, and your siblings' births broadened their love. They shared the warm glow of love with you. You learned how wonderful unconditional love felt. And you learned to give others your unconditional love. Your classmates and teachers relished the time you spent with them. You brought joy and hope to all who knew you. The spirits of caring, sharing, love, and many others flourished in you during those years. You supported their growth, and they supported yours. It was during those years that you met and fell in love with Rick, the man that would become your future husband. You made a wonderful couple, bringing out the best in each other. You both spent time volunteering to help the homeless and at food banks to feed those who couldn't feed themselves.
It was a wonderful time in my life. I cherish those years.
Mary and Rick had a privileged childhood, loving parents who were considered pretty wealthy. Their parents loved each other, and Mary's siblings also loved her. Their birth broadened the love in their entire family. They shared the warm glow of love with Mary. It was a truly loving family. Mary learned how wonderful unconditional love felt, and she learned to give unconditional love to others as well. Her classmates and teachers relished all the time they spent with her. She brought joy and hope to everyone she knew. The spirits of caring, sharing, and love, and many others flourished in her. She supported their growth, and they supported hers. It was during those years that she met and fell in love with Rick, the man who would become her future husband. They went to the same university, where Mary pursued a career in public relations, learning how to craft a message for people and corporations to appeal to the customers and their markets. She held to her core belief that it was best to be as honest as possible with her target markets. But during this time, the voices of manipulation tried to seduce her and to create messaging that subverted the truth and appealed to the baser impulses. She battled those voices as she entered and began her career. But the question hung over her: how long could she resist? And what would become of her if she gave in? Mary smiled because she was so happy that he told about the good times she'd had. But soon her mouth turned down because Doug reminded her that the good times didn't last. All of eyes shifted to Madame Drbari and the crystal ball, who began speaking.
Now, Mary, hear what the darker spirits have to tell you.
As you find in nature, evil spirits feed on people as parasites do on plants and animals. They invade the body, embed themselves in the cells, sap the strength, and erode the host's will. Dark spirits inhabit everyone, but your choices allow them to grow and become a partner in your actions.
Mary bowed her head in anticipation of what the spirits were about to reveal. Like everyone, she'd done things she wasn't proud of, but those were actions she thought would never see the light of day. Mary still hoped that her darkest deeds were so well hidden that they would not be revealed. She didn't know that admitting her shortfalls and correcting them was the path to redemption. Continued divisiveness and lying to hide evil acts only feed the parasitic forces like food feeds the body. Now Mary had to hear what her darker spirits had to tell.
The spirits have more to say.
You joined a public relations firm after college, happy to go to work in your industry. You watched your colleagues' careers prosper, content to wait for your turn. After management passed over you promoting others, envy crept into your thoughts. You plotted to undermine others to gain rank and position in the company. It worked too. Remember, Josephine Daniels?
She avoided eye contact with Doug, Madame Trabari, and any of her other friends, concentrating her gaze instead on her lap. When she could take the silence no longer, she brought her eyes back to Doug. He had not shifted his intense stare. She solemnly nodded, acknowledging her memory of Josephine. Mary nodded, resigned to what was about to come next.
The project was too ambitious for you, and you got overwhelmed. Josephine took up the slack. As the project succeeded, Josephine made certain you shared in the credit, though your contribution was minimal. As the project neared a conclusion, Josephine came forward to tell everyone she'd have to take a leave of absence for personal reasons. When Josephine left, you had a clandestine meeting with your bosses, telling them you'd carried her through the project, shouldering most of the load to hide her condition. The project's success landed the company a permanent new account, and you got the assignment instead of Josephine, though she had completely recovered from her condition. She never knew what you did.
A shameful expression filled Mary's eyes, mouth, and cheeks. She couldn't look at her friends. Instead, she kept her gaze on Doug, wondering if her most protected secret was about to be revealed. Her stomach churned, realizing the revelation was inevitable, and her life would never be the same.
Getting away with your deception emboldened you. Power and success filled your heart, sending your professional life skyrocketing. But your personal life took a different track. Your high school sweetheart and husband, Rick's affection for you, seemed to wane. You resented the lack of attention. You felt he should be grateful to have a wife like you. So, your eyes began to stray.
And realizing that her deepest, darkest secret had been exposed, gloom filled her face. She only hoped that she would be spared the indignity of the lurid details spilling from Doug's mouth to her husband and friends' ears. But this was not a night for hope. It was a night for reckoning. She welded her gaze to her lap, unwilling to face her husband's angry glare. Doug continued to recite the disgraceful history that Mary had met her lover at an automobile dealership that she represented as a public relations expert. He was a hands-on and he insisted on being a part of each and every message that his business put out. At first she resisted her attraction and impulse to chase him, but soon she fell under the spell of his warm blue eyes, confident manner, and loving ways. Her career and Rick's had driven a wedge in their marriage, stealing the minuscule daily intimacies they once shared. Gone were the flirtatious winks, gratuitous comments, gentle touches, and 1,000 other unspoken words and gestures that bound the two together. Their life had become too rushed, too busy, and ambitious for such trivial pursuits. They wanted things, lots of expensive things that they envied others for having. Mary shook her head from side to side. If reciting the fact that she had committed adultery was not bad enough, Doug continued to recite even worse details. He repeated that Mary's lover had a wife and 5 small children of his own, and that he and Mary discussed what they would need to do to be together. They considered murder, but ruled it out. Instead, they agreed that he would shift his assets into an offshore corporation out of the reach of his wife. They planned that he would leave his wife, file for divorce, and battle for as much of their estate as he could possibly manage. November the 1st, tomorrow, was the target date. But fate stepped all over her plans because her lover died of a heart attack 6 weeks ago. Now she didn't know what to do. Mary didn't answer because Doug waved his hands in a circular motion, silencing her. Not only did Doug muzzle Mary with his movements, but he also freed Rick's voice.
Mary, did you cheat on me? After all, we'd been through over the years. You cheated on me? And you were planning to leave me and ruin me at the same time. If my hands weren't taped to this chair, I'd...
Yes, Rick. Mary interests shifted away from you. But what did you expect? You were too caught up in pursuing your career goals and making more and more money to buy more and more things to notice. What does that say about you, Rick?
Rick shifted his gaze from Mary to Doug.
Let's see what the spirits have to say about you, Rick.
I don't care what your make-believe spirits have to say. This show is over. I'm getting out of here, not. Let me go.
His bindings, his face reddening and a vein in his neck threatening to pop. He failed to weaken the sturdy chair or loosen his bindings' grip on him. Doug let him exhaust himself with his tantrum, much as a 2-year-old's parents might do.
As a child, the good spirits dominated your life. You obeyed your parents, respected all around you, and got along with your classmates. As a gifted athlete graced with a charming personality, you enjoyed the respect and admiration of your teachers and peers. You treated others with kindness and humility, understanding the struggles others faced.
Mary looked up from her lap, shifting her eyes to Rick. Her expression seemed to transport her back in time when she had immense love and respect for Rick. Her eyes softened and her gentle smile crept across her face.
I see, Mary, that you remember why you fell in love with Rick all those years ago. He was filled with goodness and nurtured the spirits of charity and brotherly love in those days, didn't he?
Mary nodded.
Rick built upon that foundation all through his high school years as you and he did charity work, built a network of loving friends, and the warmth in his heart grew even more expansive during your college days. You broadened the influence of your good spirits during your college days. You volunteered to tutor struggling students, avoiding the fraternity life and the drinking binges that went with it. You also went home to help your ailing parents as often as possible, forsaking spring break trips to Florida's beaches. And you helped your parents as much as you could. Not only did you work 2 jobs in college, but you also received an academic scholarship. You sacrificed as much as you could to build a great future.
I had so many hopes and dreams in those days. Most of all, I wanted to ask the woman I loved to marry me. I postponed proposing to her until I had a future to offer her.
After graduation, you proposed with the wedding to take place the following year. You thought a year would give you enough time to kick off your career and save enough money for you and Mary to jump-start your married life together. It was a noble plan.
It was a perfect plan.
Tears formed in Mary's eyes as Rick recalled the aspirations for their lives. She tried to speak but couldn't since Doug had taken her voice. All Mary could do was mouth, "I loved you so much," as she gazed into Rick's eyes.
You had certainly cultivated the noble spirits to grow inside you during those early days. But they didn't survive what was to come next. Did they, Rick? They didn't survive at all. You nurtured a darker set of spirits tolerating their growth as you began your career. Then, encouraging them to get stronger with every coming day. You let them fortify their hold on you until they muted the noble spirits of your younger years. Didn't you?
It wasn't my fault. I couldn't help it. I was forced into the competitive world of survival of the fittest, living every day by the law of the jungle. I had no choice.
You always had a choice, and you made yours. You chose to become a demon, and now your wife and friends will hear what you hid from the world for your greedy pursuit of money and power.
Rick hung his head in despair. He'd always found a way to wrestle control of events away from everyone he encountered. But not this time. He sat helpless, entirely at Doug and Madame Drabari's mercy. And no mercy would come. Madame Drabari spoke.
Once Mary became your wife, you no longer cherished her as a partner. Instead, she'd become another one of your possessions to do with as you chose. Duh. Let the dark spirits recount Rick's deeds.
You expected Mary to take care of your household and subvert her career aspirations to yours. I believe your words were, I make more money than you, and I always will. A good wife supports her husband's business goals. You must learn that sacrifice is your role in building our future together. Your payoff will be getting all the things you desire.
Things. Payment for supporting your career. A fair deal in your mind filled with the voices of the dark spirits.
The evil spirits whom you've chosen to follow have used your excuses to claim justification for their acts. Listen to how the spirits describe some of your dark deeds.
Please don't.
As a stock trader, you sought every advantage you could muster to outperform your peers. Laws regulating trading behavior soon became a nuisance to be skirted. You considered the rules set out by Congress as impediments to success by uninformed fools. They didn't apply to smart people like you. After all, you created wealth when the average working stiff created nothing. Taxes, what a joke. You stretched every loophole to their breaking point, hiding personal expenditures as business expenses and employing elaborate charades to avoid declaring income.
Rick shook his head defiantly. Doug waved his hand, restoring Rick's ability to speak.
All businessmen did the same things I did. I wasn't the only one doing it. It was all part of the game.
You are correct, Rick. Many others did the same as you. But a thief is a thief, whether he's robbing a bank or his fellow citizen by unfairly cheating on his taxes. Now, I'm silencing you again to allow the spirits to continue. You always had a choice, and you made yours. You chose to become a demon, and now your wife and friends will hear what you hid from the world for your greedy pursuit of money, and you became particularly adept at acquiring insider information to transact illegal trades. You developed a network of insiders in your chosen companies and bribed them to disclose strategic developments. That allowed you to sell when their stock was about to plummet and buy when others were on the verge of rising. Cash and gifts became your preferred methods of bribery. When the feds came calling, you made a deal to rat out your friends for immunity from prosecution.
Rick froze in place, the blood leaving his face. He couldn't look at Mary or either of his two friends. He just sat there, pale and deflated in humiliation. His gaze went to his lap, much the same as Mary's a few minutes before.
Of course, you are shocked, Mary. Rick told you he left his Wall Street firm to go into business for himself. But that wasn't the complete story. He had to leave because, with the information he'd provided the feds, his firm's upper management had to enter pleas and pay huge fines to avoid prison. Rick's reward was getting to skate scot-free. As close as you came to losing your freedom, Rick, you landed on your feet. Instead of stifling the evil forces, you clung to them even tighter. Your escape at your colleagues' expense convinced you that you were smarter than everyone else, so you doubled down, feeding the evil inside you. You'd amassed a large amount of cash, and your ambition craved even more. That is when you hatched your next scheme. You searched your contact list for friends who had businesses needing capital injections to grow to the next level. You found one. A longtime friend's business fit the bill. You approached your friend and convinced him to allow you to buy your way into his business. He trusted you. And why wouldn't he? You'd been friends for years. The problem was, you had no plan to grow the business with him. You planned to steal the business. You counted on his lack of sophistication in legal matters and his trust in you. It worked because he didn't get a lawyer to look at the papers he signed. He didn't see the provision that required him to match any future dollars you invested or forfeit a concurrent amount of stock. So, when you invested more money, he agreed without protest. The business seemed to be growing, and you assured him things were great. Then, one day, you dropped it on him. He'd lost all his stock to you and no longer owned his business. You did. You left him broke and depressed. You sold the business to his main competitor, something he vowed never to do.
Rick looked at Mary and raised his shoulders in a universal sign for, I don't know what he's talking about. Her expression converted into disgust as she shook her head side to side.
You recycled your diabolical model paired with more treacherous methods to acquire and sell several other businesses. You used your wealth against your friends and your wife. There's more, Rick. Do you need me to continue?
Please, don't continue. I don't want to hear any more. I'm so sorry.
Once again, Doug's hand gesture silenced Rick. This time, it also allowed Sally to speak. She said,
Why are you doing this to me? I haven't ever been married or owned a business. I'm not like Mary and Rick.
Madame Jabari said,
No, Sally, you are not like Mary and Rick. You are much worse.
Everyone shifted their gaze to Sally as Doug began to talk.
The spirits have a story to tell about you, Sally. You grew up in the same neighborhood with the person you claimed was your best friend. Yes, Sally, the same person you just attempted to distance yourself from. As you can see, Sally, Mary never suspected how few roots your friendship with her had. How could she? You spent the night at her house nearly every weekend. You spent so much time together, people thought you were a member of Mary's family. You told everyone from grammar school through high school that you and Mary were sisters. All phony, of course. But why? The spirits have the answers. But before they speak, they want to give you a chance to explain yourself.
You don't know how hard my life has been. Mary had everything handed to her on a silver platter. I didn't because my parents barely made ends meet. Mary's parents gave her everything she wanted, but my parents didn't earn enough to do the same for me. The other kids picked on me, making fun of my naturally curly hair. I had to watch what I ate every day, so my figure would get the boys' attention I wanted.
The spirits say you were born an only child that your parents worked hard to give you as much as they could. They paid for every extracurricular activity you joined. You and Mary were high school cheerleaders, an honor reserved for popular students. Yet you claim to be disadvantaged.
I was disadvantaged. I never got the respect and honors I deserved.
Mary and Rick, both classmates of Sally, shook their heads, not believing what their ears were taking in.
The spirits have heard enough from you. You are a narcissist. You were born with the same good spirits as everyone else. You chose to stifle them. Maybe that's not strong enough. More accurately, you killed them or ran them away, making room for the darker spirits that suited your purposes better.
The dark spirits flourished in you. You embraced them. You exuded charm, all the while scheming to manipulate others to suit your purposes. Your alliance with the dark demons guided your actions. The more you lied and manipulated, the stronger they grew and the better you got at it. You are much worse.
Sally tried to speak to no avail. She squirmed against her bindings as she struggled to speak. Her voice, a weapon she'd honed to perfection all her life, had been silenced. Sally had no choice but to listen, though she didn't really care what the spirits had to say. Doug said,
Nod, if you remember, 2 classmates called Brad Sorensen and his girlfriend, Nora Myers.
Recognition registered on Mary and Rick's faces as they both nodded. After a couple of seconds, tears began to flow down Mary's face. Doug paused for a minute as Mary cried. He searched Sally's face for any change in her demeanor. He wasn't surprised to see her stare at Madame Trabari's face in the crystal ball, showing no emotion at all. Doug spoke, addressing Sally.
Nora was also a childhood friend of yours and Mary's. Maybe she wasn't as much of a bestie as you and Mary, but Nora was also someone you called sister. You 3 rode bikes together, listened to music, and shared secrets. Nora fell head over heels in love with Rick's friend, Brad Sorensen, in high school. He fell for her too, and they became an inseparable couple. Mary had Rick, and Nora had Brad. You had no one. You could have had your pick of the boys, but you chose to tease them and remain unattached out of reach to keep them all chasing you. But you got envious of Nora. She didn't bow to you like you thought she should have in your senior year, and jealousy overcame you. Even though Nora was going through difficult times, you felt no empathy for her. So, you secretly went out with Brad. No one knew what you'd done, not even Nora. So you went to Nora's house one night to confess, describing all the details. Nora couldn't deal with it. The worst happened. You held her father's hand as you claimed to have no idea what would have upset her. You fooled everyone, hiding your responsibility for her passing. After graduation, you set your sights on marrying a rich man. You had no career aspirations beyond finding someone to take care of you and give you everything you wanted. You bled several men dry and left them when they ran out of money. No matter what they gave you, you wanted more. Nothing satisfied you. You found the next guy before you dumped the last one. You mocked how they dressed, talking behind their backs, claiming they weren't good enough to be with you. Not only did you bleed them dry, but you also refused to work or do any household chores, claiming it was beneath you. If they challenged you, your anger would get out of control, throwing dishes and vases, crashing them to the floor. Now you've targeted Mason. But, as you'll soon hear, things are not as they seem.
Why are you doing this to me?
Mason didn't respond as he glared at her, stone-faced. His eyes froze in place, cold and distant. She directed her attention to Madame du Barry, and her face fell. A panic expression slid across her face. Sally shivered and asked,
None of this is true. Don't believe them. Is Nora Myers' spirit here tonight?
The thought of Nora's ghost terrified her. Madame du Barry didn't answer. She only smiled for the first time that night. Doug silenced Sally and allowed Mason to speak. Unlike the others, Mason said nothing, simply smiled at Doug and Madame du Barry, as if he were enjoying their performance.
I didn't expect the spirit's revelations about Sally to disturb you. You knew what she was about for a long time, and it didn't bother you at all. She is the woman you were looking to find when you returned to Natchez. You've got an engagement ring you intend to give to her in your pocket, don't you?
Mason Baker, a man with a busy life. The spirits have quite a story to tell.
Mason didn't react. He suspected what was about to follow and sat back to hear if they got the details right. Doug continued.
While it's true, you were born with the same number of good spirits as all of your friends, they didn't have long to live in you. As soon as you could form independent thoughts, you followed the voices of the darker spirits. It didn't require much effort, because you wanted to follow their directives. They fed your darker impulses, and you cherished what they had to say.
Mason sat motionless, still not saying a word. Mary, Rick, and Sally riveted their eyes on him, expecting him to protest. They knew Doug had restored his voice, yet he said nothing. Why didn't he protest, they wondered.
To your parents and everyone you met, you seemed to be the most charming boy they'd ever known. You said and did the right things to ingratiate yourself to your teachers and peers. But they didn't know what was going on inside your head. It started with cats. At no more than 6 years old, cats fascinated you. You didn't like them. To you, they seemed sneaky. They skulked around, sneaking up on you, watching you from a distance. One snuck up on you and scratched your face. You sent them on their way.
Mason's three friends' eyes widened at hearing what Doug said. Once again they stared at Mason, waiting for him to protest. Mason said nothing, showing no emotion whatsoever. They couldn't believe it. Any normal person would deny every word Doug was saying. Doug paused to allow Mason to speak. Nothing. Doug began speaking again.
After high school, you took your finely honed skills to New York. A smart guy like you belonged in the big leagues. The Big Apple suited the big man. Things didn't go like you thought they would. Not at all. You ran into people more skilled than you. It made you regroup and change your tactics. You needed to learn from these guys. Use your charm to get next to them and learn what you could from them. Nothing to say, Mason? You are waiting for the next part of your life the spirits have to reveal. I won't keep you waiting. Your childhood desires transformed. You decided you had to abandon the good spirits. Cats were no longer what you needed. You needed a woman.
A shocked expression flashed over Mary, Rick, and Sally's faces. Sally's eyes implored Mason to deny Doug's accusation, yet he said nothing. His smile dimmed slightly, but only for a moment. It returned, flashing ever brighter, because he couldn't wait to hear Doug's rendition of his past deeds.
You postured, conning people into believing your net worth was greater than your balance sheet reflected. You craved status among the business community, but you wanted women to think you were filthy rich. You wanted all women to desire you, but it was the gold diggers you targeted. Of course, you hid your attraction to those types of women, being careful never to be seen in public with them. Why? Not because they embarrassed you. No, you had different plans for them. Do you remember Katie Hudson?
All eyes turned to Mason. He said nothing. He was restraining himself from reacting to Doug's question. He stared at Doug with the same grin on his face as before.
You always remember your first. Katie was the first woman you murdered. You started by love-bombing her, making her believe she was the only woman for you. But you didn't love her at all. You hated her. You hated all women who thought they could manipulate you. You told her you wanted to spend a special night with her. And on that memorable night, you invited her to your apartment. Not the one you lived in. The one off the beaten track your secret identity used. Of course, Katie believed it was your only apartment. She thought you lived there, but she knew you by a different name than Mason Baker. You cooked her an Italian dinner and had a couple of bottles of red wine to accompany the meal. Then, after you'd eaten and cleaned the kitchen, you sat next to her on the couch. You kissed her, stood, reached in your pocket, pulled out a ring, dropped to one knee, and proposed marriage.
Once again, all eyes focused on Mason. He showed no emotion whatsoever. Doug said,
She said yes. Katie jumped to her feet and hugged you. You reached behind your back to retrieve something. Then, you brought it around and finished the night as you'd planned. You relished the look of disbelief that appeared on her face.
Yes.
Now all you had to do was take out the trash, so you divided it into small pieces to be placed in garbage bags and thrown in bins around the city. You repeated the exact treatment with 14 other women you dated and planned the same for Sally tonight after she accepted your marriage proposal.
Mason's friends wondered why he didn't protest any of Doug's accusations. Mason didn't care what they said because he'd planned this entire night. This was the night he'd been thinking about for years. His special night. His night to scratch the itch that nagged at him most of his life. He wondered how Madame Dubarry and Doug had researched so many details about Mary's good and bad deeds, and then there were the details even he didn't know about Rick and Sally. Mason didn't expect them to expose his murderous ways. But what the hell, he thought. Mary, Rick, and Sally weren't going to leave alive. He planned to kill Sally himself. Mary and Rick were Madame Dubarry and Doug's responsibility. Sally had commented how much she liked his black boots. Mason wondered if she'd felt the same way if she'd known he'd worn them to conceal a knife with an 8-inch blade. The entire time Doug summarized his life, Mason looked forward to the joy he'd get from disposing of Sally's body. He figured Madame Dubarry and Doug would release him, leaving the others bound to their chairs. He hadn't decided whether to kill Sally while constrained or release her to fight for her life. He concluded there was no sense in giving her a chance to scratch him. Besides, he wanted to take his time with her. He'd hated her for years. If he'd ever been concerned enough to go to a shrink, he might have learned that Sally was the reason he killed other women. But he'd hated his mother and father, so there was a more than equal chance that his parents were responsible for making him a monster. Doug waved his hands, freeing everyone in the group to speak. Rick said,
I always knew there was something strange about you, but I have to admit, Mason, I never suspected any of this. I told Mary that Sally was crazy to set her sights on you.
Sally said,
When we get out of here, I never want to see you again.
Mason shifted his gaze to Doug and said,
They've had their turn to speak, now it's mine. If you haven't figured it out yet, this is my party. I went looking for someone to hire for you three. Well, maybe just Rick and Mary. I'll admit, I was a little conflicted about Sally, but in the end, I decided to save her for myself. My entire life I've stewed about how you treated me when we were younger. Those thoughts soothed me, helping me go to sleep knowing this day would come. When I found Madame Drabardi and I concocted the State Fair prize for Mary to get you here tonight. I planned every detail. I chose the time and place, even the costumes.
Mary shifted her eyes to Doug, as if to ask to verify Mason's statement. Doug said,
Mason has accurately described how he contacted us and what we said we'd do.
Mason continued,
I chose the zombie costume for you, Mary. Why? Because you went through life doing all the right things. Good grades, cheerleader, married the star jock, and went to college. You stumbled through life following the crowd, just like a zombie. Had I known about your sinister side, I might have changed my mind. And you, Rick, a businessman sucking the life out of people. What else could you be but a vampire? And dear Sally, a cat, sneaky, scheming, and cunning. I've always hated cats, so it was the perfect costume for you. Then there's my costume, the Grim Reaper. You must admit it's perfect.
Mason, do you have more to say?
Yes. The next dimension. I'm told it's a wonderful place. Madame Drabardi and Doug will handle Mary and Rick's journey. Madame Drabardi and Doug like to use a wood chipper. Sally, I will personally escort you. You used to make fun of me for spending so much time on the river catfishing. Fishing requires bait. You will be perfect. They will love you.
Mason concluded his diatribe and turned his eyes to Doug. The others did the same. A long minute, where time seemed to stand still, followed before Doug asked,
Are you finished saying what you wanted to say to everyone, Mason?
Mason swiveled his head to search his schoolmates' faces before speaking.
Yes, it's time to finish this.
He cut his eyes to the side, lying beside his chair.
Remove my tape so I can cut Sally to bite-sized pieces while Mary and Rick watch. Then I'll head to the Mississippi River, and you can help the happy couple along.
Yes, Mason, it is time to bring this night to an end, but it will not be the way you planned. It's true. You hired us and planned this night. But though you paid us, we don't work for you. We serve the spirits, and they have a surprise for you. Will you tell Mason what comes next?
Madame Drabardi's name translates from Romanian to English as Lady Fortune Teller. My Roma name, Du Temnissa, translates into English as Spirit Jailer. I am the Spirit Jailer. For centuries, she and I have crossed the lines of time, searching for the dark spirits too dangerous to roam free and confine them to a wretched place from which they can't escape. Next, we will do what we have done for centuries. Your fates are sealed.
Two aromatherapy misters activated, rendering Sally and Mason unconscious. Mary and Rick remained alert with their voices restored. They sat in silence, too stunned to speak after what they'd just heard.
You may wonder why you are awake while your friends sleep. The spirits have a message for your ears that would be wasted on Sally and Mason. Earlier this evening, I asked you if you saw the signs. Looking back, can you see where you went wrong? And did you see what Sally and Mason really were?
When we began this session, I told you that good and evil spirits existed with a full range in between. Like everything in the universe, a balance exists between them. What the Far Eastern philosophers call yin and yang. A struggle for dominance persists between them, silent and out of sight, as when bacteria battle viruses in your body. If one overwhelms the other, the host dies. And like bacteria and viruses, dark spirits mutate, becoming more virulent and destructive if not contained. When the dark ones become too strong, Madame Drabardi and I are dispatched to find them and neutralize them. We place them in isolation for eternity outside of time and space, what you might call an alternative reality or dimension.
What is our future like?
Not yet. But there is something you must learn from this night. There is a difference between a mistake and a choice. A mistake is when you do something without any intention of causing harm. A choice is when you do something you know you shouldn't. You and Rick chose to follow the dark spirits. But you also maintained many good spirits in you. I will free you to leave after seeing what happens to Sally and Mason. Their fates are sealed. After tonight, what you choose to do with your lives will determine your futures.
I don't want to fall into the same trap as Sally and Mason. How can we avoid their mistakes?
There is a scale. Your spirit will be imprisoned once you've gone too far toward evil. Dar will explain.
There are 7 deadly sins. You've heard Sally and Mason's stories, and they committed them all. Pride, envy, wrath, gluttony, lust, sloth, and greed. You know which you are guilty of violating. Redeem yourselves and restore balance to your worlds.
The aromatherapy diffusers in front of Mary and Rick activated for a moment, briefly incapacitating them. Before they passed out, they saw Madame Trabari and Dub Timnicer vaporize, disappearing in a wisp of smoke, along with the table, the crystal ball, and the chairs. They awoke, seated on the floor with their backs braced against the wall. Sally and Mason sat next to them, unconscious.
I am sorry for how I treated you for the last several years, Mary. If you give me the chance, I'll make it up to you as long as my heart beats.
Tears flooded Mary's face, and she said,
I love you so much.
Mary and Rick hugged each other as tightly as they had ever done. When they heard Sally and Mason began to rouse, they stood. Before they took 3 steps toward the door, Sally reached to her right side, pulling a pistol from her purse. Before she could aim it at Mason's head, he extracted an 8-inch knife from his boot and tried to jab it in her neck. Sally dodged, preventing the blade from lodging in her throat, but it sliced the side of her neck, and she brought the gun around. Mason grabbed her hand, holding the pistol, and wrestled it downwards, both her and his hands struggling for the trigger. When it hit his lap, it fired. The bullet entered below Mason's chin and exited through the top of his head, splattering blood and brains on the wall. Sally managed a nervous smile, but it was short-lived. Mason's blade had cut her carotid artery, and she bled out, cantering toward him as she died with her head resting on his shoulder. The battle between Sally and Mason horrified Mary and Rick, but it happened so quickly they couldn't avoid witnessing it. Of course, the spirits wanted them to see the tragic end of these 2 miserable lives.
Let's get out of here, Rick. I'll never be able to get this scene out of my head.
Though it's a terrifying thing to witness, it's also... Sally wanted to control a man and letting her lean on him and support her. Now she'll lean on Mason forever, a man who saw her as she was. And Mason, who always thought everyone should acknowledge he had the biggest brain in the room, has them on display for all to see. And a needy cat glued to him forever.
Mary and Rick drove away, leaving no trace of their visit to the abandoned plantation. Years later, when Sally and Mason's remains were found, the cops declared it a murder-suicide, a tragic lover's quarrel in a place where 8 others had committed suicide before them. What is it about this place, the sheriff mused to his deputy, that makes people want to end their lives? I guess it'll always remain a mystery. Somewhere in the netherworld, Madame Trabari and Doug Timnicer have only one question for all who hear this story. Have you seen the signs, and what choices will you make?